Yesterday I introduced how to find the slope of a line, and today we're going to practice not only determining the type of slope, what the slope is, but we are also going to be figuring out how to find slope using a formula. So if you go to the first page, yesterday we discussed that there are 4 different types of slope. We read a graph from left to right. So on the first 2, you'll notice that from left to right, the direction of our line is going down. Some people were a little bit unsure of how to determine what was positive and what was negative. So I had noticed that we could do something called the end test. If we take our graph and we draw a line at each end, the negative graphs are going to form the letter N for negative. So these both form an N for negative. If I were to try to do that N test on the positive slopes, you'll notice that it creates a backwards N, which is not an N, so they do not pass the N test, which means they are going up and they are positive. So reading from left to right, our graphs go up. We would say that those 2 graphs have a positive slope. Down at the bottom, we have our 2 special cases. We have a 0 slope and we have an undefined slope. Try to think back to yesterday what I said the tips were for the 0 slope. If I were to write the word 0, the first line that I make has a 0 slope. So I like you to write this right on your notes like this because I think sometimes that it visually sticks for you. So if you're trying to determine between a 0 slope and an undefined slope, you can write it out and figure out your answer. Same goes for undefined. If I were to write the word undefined, that first line that I make is up and down like an undefined slope. So if you're asked to identify the type of slope, you are just going to answer with positive, negative, 0, or undefined. Next, what we want to do is we want to be able to figure out exact numbers for our slope. So first, I want to look at this graph that we have here, and you'll notice that from left to right, it's going up. So I'm telling you that my slope is positive. Because I'm saying my slope is positive, that means I need to have both positive numbers here as part of my slope. Slope is considered rise, how far you go up and down, up or down I should say, over run, and how far left or right you go. If we go up, it's a positive number. If we go down, it's negative. If we go to the right, it's positive. If we go to the left, it's negative. We are going to pick 2 points on the line. So I chose this point here and this point here. We want to figure out how high do we have to rise and then how far do we have to run. So I could go to get from this point here to the top point, I go up 2, so I'm going to put that, I rise 2, and I run 1. Since I went up 2, it's going to be a positive 2, and since I went to the right 1, it's going to be a positive 1. Now if you decided you wanted to go in the opposite direction, you wanted to start with the top point, you would say we go down 2, negative 2, and we go to the left 1, which is negative 1. But what you should remember from our integer rules is that 2 negatives become a positive, so it's going to be the same as what we had originally said. So we're going to take a look at the next one. First of all, just looking at this graph from left to right, you'll notice that it's going down, so it's a negative slope, which means when we have our answer, we need to have a negative in our slope. So if I pick 2 points on the line, I'm going to pick 2 that aren't selected actually. I'm going to pick this one here and this one right here. I have to find my slope. So how do I get from the first point to the second point? I have to go down 1, 2, 3. Going down is negative, so negative 3, and I go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I get negative 3 over 6. Notice, I said my slope was negative, and I have a negative in my answer. If you wanted to reduce this to negative 1/2, you are more than welcome to. You'll notice that had I chosen the points that were already selected on the graph, it would have immediately taken me to down 1/2 or negative 1/2. It's the same thing. If I look at these 4 examples, I have to match the corresponding slope with them. And what you want to notice is that there are only 2 slopes on here that are positive, so 2 slopes that from left to right go up. So this graph right here is positive, and this graph right here is positive. So I have to decide which one is 1/2 and which one is 2. So in order to identify which one is which, you're going to pick 2 points on the line and figure out how do you get from point A to point B. On the first one, I have to go up 2, and I have to go to the right 1. So that one's a positive 2/1. I can continue that pattern. Up 2/1, up 2/1, and I continue making points on that line. Remembering that up and down is on the top, and left and right is on the bottom. Which leaves me with 1/2 for this bottom right graph. If I were to pick 2 points to get from point A to point B, I go up 1/2. Up 1/2, which is why my slope is 1/2. The other 2 graphs that I have are negative because from left to right they are going down. Now we just have to identify which one's which. So if I pick 2 points here, let's say I pick this point and I pick this point. To get from point A to point B, I go down 3 and I go over 3. Well, negative 3/3 isn't an option over here, but what you can notice is that I could reduce that. Negative 3/3 is the same as negative 1/1, which is negative 1. So this graph goes with negative 1, leaving my last graph as negative 1/2. Just to double check, I go down 1/2. Down 1/2. Down 1/2. So that one works out. When we get to the slopes that are 0 and undefined, you want to remember our rule. If I want to figure out which one's undefined, I'm going to just make a U. Oh, that first line goes for undefined, which means that this graph over here is undefined. Leaving me, if I were to write the word 0, that one goes with this one. So if we wanted to say the type of slope, we're going to say either 0 or undefined. If we want to say the specific number, we are going to figure out how do we get from point A to point B. In this case, I have to go up and down 0, and I have to go to the right. You'll notice my grid line is right here. I go up and down 0, but I have to go to the right 2. So my slope is 0/2. The next one, I'll go ahead and draw in my grid lines because they weren't connected. On an undefined slope, how do you get from point A to point B? Well, we have to go down 2 over 0. So for a 0 slope, you'll notice that the 0 is in the numerator. For an undefined slope, the 0 is in the denominator. And the way that this works is, for the 0 slope, you ask yourself, how many times does 2 fit into 0? Well, 2 does not fit into 0, which means it's 0. If I came over to the problem on the right, I'd ask myself, how many times does 0 fit into negative 2? Well, 0 fits into negative 2 0 times. It fits into negative 2 once. It fits into negative 2 twice, 3 times, 4 times. It is undefined how many times 0 can fit into a specific number. And that's why when 0 is on the bottom, it's considered undefined. Okay, yesterday we took some notes, and I want to make sure everybody gets this formula copied down into your notes. So if you need to pause it to get this copied down, please pause it. This is the equation for finding the slope of a line. So whenever you see the variable m, you are going to coin that with slope. M stands for slope. The way that I remember it is if you were to go skiing, you would see a ski slope, you'd see hills that go up and down that you'd want to ski on that kind of look like the letter M. I'm just trying to find a way to make the connection. So M is slope. The equation looks rather confusing, but if we break it down, it'll start to make more sense. So it's okay if it seems a little bit overwhelming. It is y2 minus y1 all over x2 minus x1. And all you're simply doing is you are finding the change from 1x from 1y to the change in 1x. If we go to the next one, you'll see an example and we can kind of go through how that works. So sometimes you aren't given a graph in order to find the slope between 2 points. Sometimes you're just given the points. The problem with just being given points is you don't know what x you're talking about. So what I do is I pick, okay, I'm going to call this one my first point, and I'm going to call this one my second point. And I just label them. So then what I'm going to say is this 4 is the x of my first point. This 5 is the y of my first point. That way if I say, what is x, you can clarify what x you're talking about. So if I go to my second point, the 7 is the x of my second point. The 12 is the y of my second point. So those little numbers are just identifying which point you're talking about. Once you've identified and labeled your coordinates, you just plug into the formula. So in order to find slope, slope is the letter m, it equals y2. If I look at my numbers here, y2 is 12, minus my y1 is 5, over my x2 is 7, and my x1 is 4. So then you calculate. 12 minus 5 is 7, 7 minus 4 is 3, and since this can't reduce without being a mixed number, you're just going to leave it as is. Your slope is 7 over 3. So in terms of directions, that would be up 7 to the right 3. It's okay if it doesn't make sense right now. Just we will keep practicing, and I think as you keep practicing, it'll start to make a little bit more sense. Okay. So you'll notice that on every slide I have these steps. Label an ordered pair, label the other ordered pair, substitute the numbers into the formula correctly, and then simplify. So I'm going to label this as my first point. I'm going to call the negative 4 my x of my first point. The 5 is my y of my first point. I'm going to label my second point. I have my x of my first point, or of my second point, sorry, and I have my y of my second point. So now that I've done step 1 and step 2, I can substitute into the formula. M equals y2, which is 12, minus y1, which is 5, over x2, which is negative 7, minus x1, which is negative 4. Notice that I took the minus sign from the equation. Notice up here it's a minus sign. And I took the negative for that negative 4. So if I look at the top, 12 minus 5 is 7. And with the bottom, negative 7 minus negative 4, I have to keep it, change it, flip it. Negative 7 plus 4 is negative 3. So if I look at this slope right here, you'll notice that there's one negative symbol, which means this is going to be a negative slope. Means you're going to go from your point, you're going to go up 7 to the left 3, and if you were to connect those, it's going to be a negative. We're just going to continue practicing and practicing until you get used to using this formula and used to practicing with these steps. So for the next one, I have to label an ordered pair. This is going to be my first one. I've got x1 and y1. Then I've got to label the other ordered pair. I'm going to call it my second point. I have x2 and y2. Now I substitute into the formula. So m equals y2, 17, minus y1, negative 5, over x2, 7, minus x1, negative 4. If I have to add or subtract, keep it, change it, flip it, 22, over, keep it, change it, flip it, 11. 22 over 11 can be reduced to 2 over 1, so I would also accept 2 over 1. I would also accept just 2. And because all numbers in these are positive, you know that it's going to be a positive slope. Okay, here's another one. So what we have to do is we're going to, again, label both of our ordered pairs. So here's my first point, here's my second point, x1, y1, x2, y2. Plug into the formula. M equals y2, 5, minus y1, negative 5, over x2, 4, minus x1, 4. Keep it, change it, flip it. 5 plus 5 is 10, over 4 minus 4 is 0. This one is one of our special cases. So if you're not sure if it's 0 or undefined, you ask yourself, how many times does 0 fit into 10? Does it fit in 0 times? Yes. Does it fit in once? Yes. Twice? Yes. Undefined. When 0 is in the bottom, it's going to be undefined. If you were to actually take 10 divided by 0 on your calculator, it's going to tell you that there's an error. And the reason it tells you that there's an error because it's undefined. The next one, label an ordered pair. Here's my first point. Here's my second point. We have our x1, our y1, our x2, and our y2. So we've labeled. Now we're going to substitute in. M equals y2, 5, minus y1, 5, over x2, 4, minus x1, 9. 5 minus 5 is 0. 4 minus 9 is negative 5. When 0 is on the top, it's a 0 slope because negative 5 fits into 0 0 times. I'm going to have you stop there and go through the practice page, finding type of slope, finding exact slope, and then using the formula to find the slope between 2 points. If you have any questions, please email me at sullivana@milton.k12.wi.us. And I should be able to get back to you before the end of the day.